Chapter 2661. Gu Mei's gaze landed on his face again. She really loves you. She came here obediently when she heard that Shui Mu was with me. My brother also came here when he heard that Qin Mu was with me. Now that you're here, does that mean we've caught them all? Zhou Chongguang clenched his fists. Gu Mei, what exactly do you want? Don't worry. Gu Mei chuckled. You'll like it. She looked at Zhou Chongguang and said slowly, I fed her an aphrodisiac. It's a very strong one. She'll die if there's no man around. Zhou Chongguang, she needs you now. He naturally didn't believe that she would be so kind. His eyes were cold. You don't believe me? Gu Mei carried Shui Mu and moved her chin to the side. Your goddess is right there. You haven't touched her for a long time, right? Go and have a good time, because this is the last time. Zhou Chongguang didn't move, but he heard Qin Mu's voice and saw her face. She was lying in the corner, her face abnormally red. Her hands were tied behind her back. She lay there and looked like she was in extreme pain. Gu Mei sneered. If you don't go, not only will your goddess die, your son will also die right now. Zhou Chongguang stared at her and said softly, Gu Mei, I've never seen anyone more cruel than you've. Cruel? I don't think so, because there's more to come. Gu Mei chuckled. Later, you'll have to leave with Shui Mu first. When Qin Mu wakes up, my brother, Gu Zai, will be with her. Naked. Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes. Gu Mei, why are you doing this? Interesting. Gu Mei laughed. If Gu Zai doesn't have a wife, he'll probably be a bachelor. I'm just pitying him. Zhou Chongguang pursed his thin lips. Gu Mei pointed the gun at Shui Mu. At this moment, Shui Mu burst into tears. This was the most difficult moment for Zhou Chongguang. Gu Zai woke up, but the medicine made him unable to move. He could only lie there and look at Zhou Chongguang. Go. Otherwise, I will take your son's life right now. Gu Mei smiled coldly. Everyone here will not be able to live. Zhou Chongguang, think about it. You'll be the only one who'll suffer in the end. I promise, I won't hurt Qin Mu. After all, she'll be Gu Zai's wife in the future. Gu Zai's eyes were filled with sorrow. Zhou Chongguang clenched his fists. He looked at Gu Zai and smiled faintly. He whispered to Gu Zai, take good care of her. Slowly, he walked towards Qin Mu. With every step he took, his heart beat violently, and with every step he took, he felt an unbearable pain. Finally, he knelt down beside Qin Mu and lowered his head to kiss the corner of her mouth. A slender arm immediately hooked onto his neck. In the dim light, that arm was smooth and alluring. It hugged Zhou Chongguang's neck, and hot red lips quickly covered his mouth. The medicine made Qin Mu forget her shame and everything around her. She was in pain, and she wanted. She didn't know who was in front of her, but she knew that he had something she wanted. Right in front of Gu Mei, as Shui Mu cried, and as Zhou Chongguang was in pain, her fingers went through his shirt, and she desperately lifted her body to kiss him. Zhou Chongguang closed his eyes slightly, and after a few seconds, he kissed her back. This was the last time, he told himself. Chapter 2662. In the dim light, the man and the woman were entangled to the extreme. Gu Mei looked at it coldly. Gu Zai lay there, unable to do anything. He said softly, does this make you feel happy, Gu Mei? Gu Mei's gaze was still there, but her words were directed at Gu Zai. Only when it hurts more can I feel that I'm alive. Gu Zai closed his eyes. I won't cooperate with you. Can you refuse such warmth? Gu Mei laughed. No, you won't. You're showing me such a scene. Is it warmth? Gu Zai laughed coldly. Gu Mei carried little Shui Mu to his side and smiled gently. From now on, she's yours. You don't know how many times she has slept with Zhou Chongguang in the past. One more time won't make a difference. Her gun slowly moved to Gu Zai's heart. Be good, or don't blame me for ignoring our sibling relationship. As she said that, she stood up and looked over there with a deep gaze. She smiled. Look at how compatible their bodies are. What a pity. From now on, this body is yours. Gu Zai, make good use of it, okay? Gu Mei smiled gently. How interesting. They would never forget such a scene for the rest of their lives. In the future, would Zhou Chongguang be in pain when he saw Gu Zai and Qin Mu together? Gu Mei smiled gently. Suddenly, She raised the gun in her hand and fired a shot at little Shuemu's hand. Blood splattered everywhere. The blood filled Gu Zei's eyes. The gunshot made Zhou Chongguang's blood freeze. He looked down at Qin Mu, who had fainted. He gritted his teeth and got up. When he left, he kissed the corner of her mouth. Qin Mu, I'm sorry. This is the last time I'm sorry. He ran over awkwardly. Gu Mei returned the water wood to him, but the gun was still pointed at him. If you don't get treatment in time, even if you don't die, your hand will be crippled. Zhou Chongguang, you can choose to stay or go save your son. If you stay, Qin Mu will be yours, but if you leave, she will be Gu Zei's. Gu Mei smiled lightly and said the cruelest words. As for Zhou Chongguang, his gaze was so cold that it was almost frozen. He hugged Shui Mu and kissed her. Then he said to Gu Zei, treat her well. With that, he quickly walked out. With every step he took, he felt that the sunlight behind him was an inch further away from him. Gu Mei had won. She had used the cruelest method to end his relationship with Qin Mu. Zhou Chongguang smiled, but his face was full of tears. In the dilapidated warehouse, she slowly walked to Qin Mu's side and looked at her unconscious state. There was a tinge of red on her face. That was the look of someone who had been loved. Gu Mei squatted down and caressed Qin Mu's face with her fingers. She said gently, how good is it? He loves you. Gu Zei looked sideways and saw her caressing Qin Mu. His heart was in his throat and he said sternly, don't touch her. Gu Mei was still squatting down. She looked over and smiled gently. Are you afraid that I'll hurt her? Gu Zei did not say anything and only looked at her. Gu Mei did not say anything. She only dragged Qin Mu's body over. She dragged her all the way to Gu Zei's side. Then, she threw Gu Zei's clothes aside. Qin Mu was placed in his arms. Gu Zei closed his eyes, feeling guilty. Chapter 2663. As Gu Mei spoke, she slowly stepped back and said, I love him, so I can't bring myself to kill him. I didn't even touch the woman he loved. Brother, don't blame me. As Gu Mei spoke, a strange smile appeared on her face. She raised her hand and pointed the gun at her forehead. What she left for Gu Zei was her last smile. And an indescribable apology. When the gunshot was heard, she fell into a pool of blood and closed her eyes peacefully. Brother, I'm sorry. I made the choice for you. Forgive me for being that selfish and headstrong person. I didn't want them to be together, so I gave Qin Mu to you. I will remember the scene between Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu, so I won't love him in my next life. Brother, don't worry. Also, I'm sorry. It was me who destroyed your stable life. You will be happy in the future. Gu Mei's eyes slowly closed, ending her life of chasing a man. Perhaps she was already tired and didn't want to live. And my child, Shui Mu, if there is a next life, I won't treat you like this again. The shot that hit Shui Mu's hand was actually missed, so it would be fine. Shui Mu, I'm sorry. This time, I'll leave by myself. You stay by my side, okay? When Zhao Zi rushed over with his men, Gu Mei was already dead. When he looked to the side, he was stunned. Gu Zei and Qin Mu were hugging each other without clothes on. It was obvious that they had done it. He held his breath and said in a hoarse voice, turn your backs. At this moment, Qin Mu slowly opened her eyes. Everything that happened before she took the medicine came to her mind. She remembered being forced to take the medicine by Gu Mei, and then, she looked at Gu Zei in shock. Gu Zei's body relaxed, and he could actually move. He closed his eyes, and a tear rolled down from the corner of his eye. Then, he reached out to hug Qin Mu and wrapped her in his clothes. He said in a low voice, I'm sorry. Qin Mu was hugged by him. She turned her face sideways and watched Gu Mei die. She threw herself into Gu Zei's arms and her body kept trembling. Gu Mei was dead. Where's Shui Mu? She asked anxiously. Gu Zei paused for a moment. In the hospital. It was up to Zhou Chongguang to decide whether or not to tell the truth. Gu Zei was thinking that if Zhou Chongguang gave up on Qin Mu, then he would protect Qin Mu. Even if his heart would never be at ease for the rest of his life, he would protect her. One by one, he helped Qin Mu put on her clothes, including his own. In the end, he let go of her and slowly walked to Gu Mei's side. He knelt down slowly and hugged Gu Mei. It's all over now. Big brother will take you back. Gu Mei deserved to die, but she was still his sister. She was no longer around, and all the evil had vanished into thin air. Qin Mu stayed by his side quietly. She was still very weak, but she insisted on not leaving immediately. She didn't ask Gu Zhe anything either. What happened between them was something that couldn't be asked. Qin Mu didn't think that it meant anything just because they had done it. But what Qin Mu didn't expect was that something unexpected happened later on. Gu Mei's funeral was handled by the Gu family. Everything was suppressed by Zhou Chongguang and Gu Zhe. Chapter 2664. Zhou Chongguang stood alone in the aisle of the hospital, thinking about what the doctor had said to him. Mr. Zhou, your blood test last week has come out. There's something wrong with your liver, so you can't donate blood. In addition, we suggest that you arrange a time for a specific examination. If necessary, you need to perform a liver transplant. What he didn't say was that there might not be a liver source, or the surgeon might reject it. Anything could happen. Zhou Chongguang leaned against the aisle and smiled softly. Liver transplant? Did it mean that he wouldn't live long? It wasn't strange for a person like him to have such a day. But what about his Mu, his Shui Mu? He vaguely thought of the love in the dilapidated warehouse. The last time. Originally, he was a little reluctant to let it go, but now, it was good that they weren't together, and it was good that Qin Mu misunderstood. It was best to forget him. Zhou Chongguang smiled softly, and his smile was extremely sad. Zhao Zi came over and looked at him. Gu Mei is dead. Zhou Chongguang suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Zhao Zi. He didn't say anything for a long time. And Qin Mu and Gu Zhe are together, Zhao Zi said softly. They're also in the hospital now, and Gu Mei has just been sent to the morgue. Zhou Chongguang was in a daze for a long time before he said in a low voice, I'll go and have a look. She was dead, and it was the last time. It was good to send her off. Her tragedy came from him, and it was also good for him to end it. Zhao Zi didn't say anything. However, Zhou Chongguang took 2 steps and stopped again. He shook his head. Forget it. It's better for her to forget me. She won't have any memory of me in her next life. Zhao Zi looked at the dozen or so cigarette butts at his feet and frowned. You're smoking so much again. Who will take care of Shui Mu if you're sick? Zhou Chongguang was in a daze again. Then, he thought of Qin Mu. Qin Mu didn't have any children, and she might not be able to give birth. Shui Mu was Gu Mei's daughter, so she was the flesh and blood of the Gu family. If Qin Mu and Gu Zhe were to raise Shui Mu together, it would be great. The Gu family would also treat her well. He smiled, feeling that this arrangement was very good. When he said that he would give Shui Mu to the Gu family, Zhao Zi stared at him for a long time and spat out a few words. Chongguang, you're crazy. I can't be more sober. Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. That's it. I can't take care of a child as a man. Zhao Zi looked at him for a long time before asking, You're not hiding anything from me, are you? No. Zhou Chongguang smiled. I can't be more sober now. He tilted his head and looked at Qin Mu, who was slowly walking over from afar. He took out a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. Not long ago, he had felt the warmth of Qin Mu's body. But in the future, her warmth would belong to someone else. Her smile, her kindness, and everything about her would be protected by another man. Gu Zhe was quite good. He smiled. It was quite good. He was clean and dedicated. There were no messy things. In that instant, Zhou Chongguang felt as if he had aged several decades. When Qin Mu walked over, he looked at her with a deep gaze. Zhou Chongguang only now knew what unspeakable pain was. He pursed his lips and smiled faintly. Shui Mu is fine. Qin Mu nodded and didn't say anything. Zhou Chongguang smiled again, but his smile was uglier than crying. Congratulations, Qin Mu. Her eyes narrowed slightly. He knew about her and Gu Zhe. Chapter 2665. Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chongguang quietly, unable to shift his gaze away. Zhou Chongguang kept smiling. He didn't say anything, but she could tell from his words that he seemed to know something. This made her a little embarrassed. After a long time, she smiled faintly. It's good that Shui Mu is fine. Can I see him? Zhou Chongguang nodded. Of course. And Qin Mu, thank you too. He knew that Gu Mei had sent her to the warehouse because of Shui Mu. He said those words of gratitude, but it was against his will. She and Shuemu were equally important to him, but he always brought harm to her. Now that he was sick, it would be hard for him to recover. Even if he recovered, his body wouldn't be the same as before. How could he give her happiness? Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly, but Qin Mu had an indescribable feeling in her heart. They had finally come to an end. He must have known about her and Gu Zhe. But this blessing seemed a little weak. Until now, there was no one else in her heart except for Zhou Chongguang. This might be the last time. Qin Mu felt that if she didn't say it now, she might not have the chance to. He was Shuemu's father, and she had slept with someone else. Qin Mu walked slowly to him. She was only a meter away from him. She looked at him deeply, at the man she had loved for so many years. Perhaps she still loved him after the divorce, but she had chosen to forget about him. She said softly, "Chongguang, take good care of yourself in the future." "Yes, I will." Zhou Chongguang heard his slightly hoarse voice and felt sad in his heart. However, his gaze was burning as he stared at her little face. In his heart, he also thought that this was the last time. Qin Mu raised his head and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly, giving him a beautiful smile. She hugged him gently and rested her face on his shoulder, saying softly, "Chongguang, you have to take care of yourself." His throat seemed to be blocked. He couldn't say a word. The sadness in his heart had reached its limit. He lowered his head and looked at the girl he loved. How he wanted to tell her that he was the one who made love to her. She had always been only him. But now that he was like this, how could he give her happiness? "Zhou Chongguang, you've been hurting her. Let go." Only by letting go could she be happy. No matter who she was with, she would be fine. He patted her back and said in an incredibly gentle voice, "Mumu, I will." However, she hugged him very tightly. This hug was filled with despair. He knew that what she thought she was doing with Gu Zhe couldn't be done with her. Idiot! Even if she had really done it, she had never let anyone down. It had always been him who had let her down. "Mumu, if there is another chance, I won't plot against you again. We will be the most ordinary couple in the world. It doesn't matter if we have children or not. When we encounter problems, we will quarrel. If it doesn't work, we will make love until we reconcile." Zhou Chongguang hugged her even more tightly than she did. There was something hot in his eyes, but he tried his best not to cry. He hoped that for the last time, he wouldn't be weak in front of her. He closed his eyes slightly and felt the warmth of her in his arms for the last time. Such an embrace was seen by Gu Zhe in the distance. He stood there with a solemn expression. He had lost his sister. Now, he saw Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang together. Chapter 2666. However, Zhou Chongguang's gaze made him hesitate. This was the first time that Gu Zhe was in a dilemma. He watched quietly, and then Zhao Zi walked over and said with a faint smile, "Gu Zhe, they have come to an end. If you really love her, please treat her well." With that, he patted Gu Zhe's shoulder and said, "Take care." Zhao Zi left. This time, he could safely get along with his blind date. Whether it was Chongguang or not, it wouldn't be him, Zhao Zi. Gu Zhe was still in line. Gu Zhe was still standing there. He didn't know how long he had been standing there. Perhaps it was only for a moment. After all, this half an hour was nothing compared to the 8 years he had been waiting for. On the other side, Zhou Chongguang gently pushed Qin Mu away. He looked at her with a smile and then pulled out the chain from his neck. The silver end of the chain was shining with silver light. Qin Mu's heart tightened. She recognized that it was his wedding ring. He had been wearing it before. At this moment, he took her little hand and gently placed the chain in her palm. His voice was low and hoarse. "Mumu, I'll give this back to you. It's officially over." He looked at her and smiled gently. "Don't miss me in the future, okay?" Qin Mu lowered her head and looked at the ring in her hand. She nodded gently and then shook her head. He couldn't help but reach out and rub her long hair. "Don't be so silly in the future. The next man, he must love you first. Do you understand?" When he said that, his nose was sore, as if he was talking to a child who was about to go on a long journey. However, he knew in his heart that the person who was going to go on a long journey might be him. He had done so many wrong things. From the beginning, he had been wrong to approach her. Qin Mu looked up, and her throat was a little dry. Zhou Chongguang suddenly pressed her body over, pressed his forehead against hers, and stared into her eyes. "Goodbye, Mumu." As he spoke, he strode towards Gu Zhe, while Qin Mu clenched the ring tightly. This time, it was not her disappearing from his life, but him completely walking out of her life. She clearly said that she didn't love him, but she still felt sad. When Zhou Chongguang walked past Gu Zhe, he said softly, "Treat her and Shui Mu well." Gu Zhe narrowed his eyes and was shocked. He looked at Zhou Chongguang, but Zhou Chongguang had already left. He gave up on Qin Mu and even gave up on Shui Mu. He gave Shui Mu to Gu Zhe. This was something that no one had expected. The corridor of the hospital was dark. Gu Zhe raised his eyes and looked in Qin Mu's direction. She had been holding onto the ring in her hand without any expression on her face and didn't make a sound. He walked over slowly and said lightly, "Do you want to see Shui Mu?" Qin Mu slowly raised his eyes and looked at him. Gu Zhe held her hand gently. Qin Mu had been feeling dizzy, and she had not recovered yet. She followed Gu Zhe into the ward, but she did not see that Zhou Chongguang had returned at the end of the corridor. He looked at her being held by Gu Zhe, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He looked at the empty passageway and stood there alone, looking cold and lonely. When they arrived at the ward, Qin Mu came back to her senses. She gently but firmly broke free from Gu Zhe's hand. "Gu Zhe, I have something to say to you." Chapter 2667. He had been really busy these days. It wasn't that he wasn't in the mood to listen to her, but he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to express himself well. He needed to think about it carefully. The words that Qin Mu wanted to say were all swallowed back down. There was nothing more tragic than losing a loved one. She wasn't that heartless. She stood with him in front of Shui Mu's bed, watching him quietly lying there. Gu Zhe suddenly said, "Zhou Chongguang gave Shui Mu to Meme." "What?" Qin Mu turned to the side, her face full of disbelief. Gu Zhe paused and continued, "I don't know the reason. Maybe you can ask him." Qin Mu looked confused. Then she shook her head and said, "I don't think so. Shui Mu and Gu Zhe were related by blood. But she wasn't related at all. What right did she have to ask? Moreover, they had just said goodbye." Qin Mu's eyes were misty. Then she sat next to Shui Mu and looked at him. The doctor said he was fine, but she was still worried. She should hate this child, but she couldn't. It wasn't because the child looked like her, but because the child had suffered so much since he was born. Qin Mu reached out and gently touched Shui Mu's forehead. She looked up at Gu Zhe and said, "You have to treat him well. Besides, he needs to go to New York with Qin Chen." Gu Zhe nodded and said, "Okay. I'll send him to New York as soon as he gets better." Qin Mu grunted and didn't say anything else. He lowered his head and looked at the child. She didn't have any regrets. She just had sex with a man once. She didn't even need to think about contraception, because she couldn't get pregnant. Qin Mu pursed his lips and felt a little bitter. Gu Zhe stood next to her. His eyes fell on Shui Mu's little face, his heart heavy. Shui Mu would have no mother from now on. His gaze shifted to Qin Mu, and his expression became gentle. She was really good. That was why Zhou Chongguang was so upset when he lost her. 3 days later, after Gu Zhe took care of Gu Mei's funeral, he personally went to New York. Qin Mu went with him. After all, she knew Shui Mu's situation the best. She personally handed the child to Qin Chen. Qin Chen checked Shui Mu's body thoroughly. After confirming that there was nothing wrong, everyone was relieved. In the laboratory, Qin Chen put his hand in his pocket and looked at Qin Mu quietly. There were some things that he wanted to say, but in the end, he didn't. He knew that Gu Zhe liked Qin Mu. Now, Zhou Chongguang had given up. Qin Chen sighed. He had thought that Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang still had a chance. That was why they got together, but he didn't expect something like this to happen. He went to take care of Shui Mu, leaving the space for Qin Mu and Gu Zhe. Qin Mu and Gu Zhe sat on the bench, surrounded by white. 4 days had passed since that day. She sat quietly, and so did Gu Zhe. He was waiting for her to speak. After a long time, Qin Mu said softly, "Gu Zhe, that time didn't mean anything. I don't have any thoughts now. I want to live alone." This was the first time she had talked about it since it happened. Gu Zhe nodded. I know. He paused. But I'm willing to wait. Chapter 2668. His voice was firmer than ever. Qin Mu, I've spent the rest of my life. Do you hear me? She seemed to be a little surprised. She just looked at him and forgot to shut her mouth. In the end, he still leaned forward and kissed her lips. Before she could react, he went deep and entangled with her. The kiss was lingering and very gentle. She didn't give him a reaction, and he didn't force her. It was very gentle, like how he had always treated her. When he ended the kiss, Qin Mu looked at him. She didn't close her eyes. Gu Zhe smiled. Qin Mu, I can wait. She was sad. She didn't know if she remembered wrongly, but she also remembered that someone had once told her that he could wait, no matter how long it took. She cried and smiled. She said, Gu Zhe, it's too hard to wait for someone. Don't wait anymore. He didn't say anything. He just reached out and stroked her long hair. Qin Mu, you don't know. Sometimes, it's not just pain, but also happiness and happiness when there's someone in your heart waiting for someone. They sat there and didn't speak again. And from that day on, Gu Zhe appeared in Qin Mu's life. She returned to B City, and he stayed in New York for a week before returning. Occasionally, he would call her and talk about Shui Mu. She didn't reject Shui Mu's existence because Shui Mu was Shui Mu. He was no longer Gu Mei's child. In the future, when Shui Mu grew up one day, someone might tell him who his mother was and that his mother loved him very much. Qin Mu hung up the phone with Gu Zhe and smiled. Life seemed to be beautiful. She had people who cared about her and people who cared about her. She sat in the gallery and stood up. I'll get off work first. The assistant smiled. See you tomorrow, Miss Qin. Qin Mu gave her a smile, took her bag and walked out. It was summer, and she wore a bohemian dress. Her figure looked especially good. He opened the door of a white BMW, got in, and drove to his apartment. Recently, Qin Mu signed up for a cooking class and learned some cooking skills. She didn't eat out after work, but cooked some ingredients at home. She also learned how to arrange flowers and made Qin Chen's model room fragrant. She liked this kind of life. Simple and beautiful. Occasionally, she would think of Zhou Chongguang. That person seemed to disappear from the world. But she didn't call him. The wedding ring that he had returned to her was placed on the bedside table. Sometimes she would look at it at night, but after looking at it, other than melancholy, there was nothing but melancholy. Qin Mu smiled, turned the steering wheel, and turned the car into the gate of the community. Just as she was about to get out of the car, Gu Zhe called again. She picked up the phone. Gu Zhe. On the other side, Gu Zhe smiled lightly. Qin Mu, are you free? Qin Mu was silent for a while. I'm going home. He was also silent. These days, her contact with him was limited to her working hours. Did she see it as a kind of work? Probably because of this, he really went to her gallery to pick a few paintings, just to get close to her. At this moment, her words were full of rejection, but she said it in a very gentle way, so he couldn't do anything about it. Qin Mu was good at destroying a man's confidence. He really didn't know why she was so crazy about Zhou Chongguang back then. Chapter 2669. He was sure that Qin Mu's taste was perfect, and he wasn't bad-looking in any way, but she just didn't care about him. In the end, she just wasn't interested in him. He couldn't do anything to her, but he didn't want to give up. He was a man, and it wasn't that he didn't care when he saw it with his own eyes that day. It was that he couldn't afford to be calculative. They were husband and wife, and he had to do it that day even if he didn't want to. But Qin Mu thought that person was him. Gu Zhe made the best of it. Slowly, he felt that the person that day was him, but he didn't have the feeling of losing his soul. Qin Mu didn't let down her guard against him because of this, and she was still polite to him. He was probably still Brother Gu in her life, which made him a little anxious, but he couldn't do anything about it. At this moment, Qin Mu held the phone and said calmly, Gu Zhe, if there's nothing else, I'll hang up first. He sighed, Qin Mu, I want to see you. Qin Mu pursed her lips and said after a while, if there's anything, let's talk at my art gallery tomorrow. That was the biggest concession she could make. Gu Zhe smiled faintly and took a step back. Qin Mu heaved a sigh of relief and said in a gentler tone, then I'll hang up. After hanging up, she opened the car door and walked into the elevator. She went up floor by floor until she reached the top floor. Just like before, she took out the ingredients from the fridge and started cooking. The phone on the counter rang, and she was stunned. She looked over and saw that the name on the phone was Zhou Chongguang. She paused for a moment, but still picked up. But she didn't make a sound, and neither did the other side. After a long time, a faint voice came from the other side. "Are you okay?" Just these 4 words were enough to make her heart ache to the point of tears. Qin Mu held the phone with one hand and covered her mouth with the other. After a long time she said, "I'm okay. How about you?" Zhou Chongguang smiled. "I'm fine." He paused for a moment before asking, "Is Shui Mu all right?" "All right." Qin Mu pursed her lips. "You can go and see him." Zhou Chongguang was silent for a while, then smiled faintly. "No need." Before Qin Mu could say anything, he had already hung up. She stood there in a daze, and there was a hint of hurt on her face. She stared at her phone for a long time. It took her a long time to calm down. Zhou Chongguang had left a shadow in her heart. For a moment, she couldn't forget it. As for Gu Zhe, although they had sex that day, she would not change anything just because they had sex once. They were all adults, so he wouldn't be a burden to her. Qin Mu was relieved and continued to deal with her cooking. She made curry rice today, but when the fragrance of curry wafted out, she felt nauseous. She suddenly covered her mouth, frowned, and rushed to the sink to retch a few times. She didn't vomit anything, but her heart felt stuffy. She thought about it and realized that she hadn't eaten anything bad in the past few days. Maybe it was because the weather was too hot. She looked at the curry rice and felt that it was a pity, so she threw it away. She only had a fruit for dinner. After taking a shower, she lay on the bed in her bathrobe and searched for the possibility of retching on Baidu. Among the various answers, Qin Mu's gaze fell on a Jihu answer. That was, pregnant. Chapter 2670. Pregnant. How was that possible? It couldn't be. How could she be pregnant? In the past, she and Zhou Chongguang had tried so hard for so long, but they didn't have a child. How could she have a child with Gu Zhe once? There must be a mistake. She still felt that the answer was more reliable because it was hot. However, she lowered the temperature of the air conditioner by 2 degrees, but she still felt stuffy in her chest. It wasn't very comfortable. Tomorrow, she should go to the hospital for a checkup. Before she went to sleep, she thought. When she went to work the next day, she didn't feel so comfortable, and she didn't have much appetite for lunch. If her assistant hadn't been divorced, she would have joked with her and asked if she was pregnant, because the symptoms were really similar. Qin Mu had a few important guests to receive in the afternoon. After she finished, she took the car key and left. It was 4:00, the time she had an appointment with Gu Zhe, but Qin Mu forgot. She only told her assistant that she was going to the hospital, and then she drove away. She went to Shangyuan Hospital and saw a physician first. After she told the doctor about the situation, the doctor was quite cautious. After all, she was Mr. Ye's biological sister, and she couldn't be careless. After thinking for a while, she called Dr. Qin Chen first. It was safer this way. She would do whatever Dr. Qin said. The doctor was actually cursing in her heart. She wanted to vomit. As an adult woman, shouldn't she go to the gynecologist first? However, Qin Mu was divorced, so it was not easy to ask. "You can't ask like this, Miss Qin. Do you still have sex? Wouldn't you be killed instantly by asking like this?" The doctor called Qin Chen's number. On the other side, Qin Chen was still sleeping at night, but as a doctor, he didn't have the habit of turning off his phone, so he answered quickly. The physician of Shangyuan Hospital euphemistically told him about Qin Mu's situation. Qin Mu looked a little uneasy as she watched from the side. Was she suffering from an incurable disease? So the doctor called Qin Chen? She looked at the doctor's expression and gulped. She couldn't help but feel nervous. After a while, the doctor handed the phone to Qin Mu and said softly, "Dr. Qin will tell you personally." Qin Mu looked at him but still answered the call. In New York, Qin Chen sat on the bed and scratched his head. "Qin Mu, did you have sex a month ago?" Qin Mu let out an ah and was stunned. Qin Chen, on the other hand, was even more straightforward. "Have you ever had sex with a man? Idiot!" It was rare for him to be so rude. He had always been a cold and indifferent person, but when it came to his sister, he couldn't help but curse. Qin Mu wanted to say no, but what happened that day came back to her again. She and Gu Zhe were hugging each other without any clothes on. It must have happened. She was a woman, and her body would tell her whether she had done it or not. She didn't say anything for a long time. There was nothing Qin Chen didn't understand, so he sneered. Go to the obstetrics and see if you're pregnant. Then he said, I forgot to congratulate you, Qin Mu, you're probably going to be a mother. After hanging up the phone, she scratched her head again. I don't know which man is so amazing. However, thinking about it, there shouldn't be anyone else other than Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu didn't seem like someone who would do a one-night stand. On the other side, Qin Mu looked at the phone and then at the doctor. Chapter 2671. Qin Mu glared at him, picked up her bag and got up. When she walked out, she was still a little hesitant and put her beautiful fingers on her lower abdomen. Pregnant? Could she really be pregnant? It was hard for her to imagine that this child was Gu Zhe's. She was pregnant after just one time? She had mixed feelings and hesitated for a long time before walking to the obstetrics and gynecology department. Qin Chen had already informed her, so she went straight to the blood test. In less than half an hour, the familiar doctor told her in a trembling voice, Congratulations, Miss Qin, you are pregnant. As for the congratulations, it was Dr. Qin Chen's request that the child should receive blessings from the moment it was in the womb. Although she was a little uncomfortable, the female doctor still said it. Qin Mu's expression was still blank. She looked at the doctor for a long time before saying, Really pregnant? There's no mistake? A blood test is the most reliable way. There's no mistake. If Miss Qin is still worried, you can come back in a month to listen to the baby's heartbeat. At that time, the cute little baby will start to beat, and the sound will be very beautiful. The doctor said, and his skin was about to fall off. Qin Mu couldn't listen to it anymore. I understand. The doctor smiled and prescribed a bottle of folic acid for her, and also put a pregnant woman's note in her hand. This is your first child, so pay special attention to maintain a happy mood. Qin Mu gritted her teeth. I will. She walked out as if she was escaping. This doctor was a big mouth. In a few days, probably all of B City would know that she and Qin Mu were pregnant after the divorce. She bit her lip and walked in the clean corridor of the hospital. After walking for a while, she twisted her ankle, but it wasn't very serious. However, she stopped and looked at the high heels on her feet. Then she took them off and walked barefoot. She remembered that pregnant women couldn't wear high heels, if she fell. Qin Mu held the high heels in one hand and stood in the corridor of the hospital, gently touching her belly. She felt that it was very magical that she was actually pregnant. She thought that she would never be a mother in this life. She had never thought of aborting the child. No matter who the father was, she was the child's mother. Mother, she was going to be a mother. At that moment, Qin Mu was so happy that she wanted to jump up. What a magical thing. Just as she lowered her gaze, a slender figure slowly walked up to her. The man's gaze landed on the pregnant woman's notice in her hand. Then he asked hoarsely, You're pregnant. Qin Mu's body froze. She raised her eyes and looked at the man in front of her. It was Gu Zhe. He knew. She looked at him, and he did the same. Then he carried her in his arms. Before she could protest, he said in a low voice, You'll catch a cold if you're barefoot. Don't you know that pregnant women shouldn't catch a cold? Qin Mu bit her lip. I'm not pregnant. Gu Zhe's deep gaze fell on her little face. Without saying a word, he carried her to the parking lot outside. He put her on the passenger seat and said in a low voice, I have something to tell you. I said I'm not pregnant. Qin Mu emphasized again. Gu Zhe, don't be like this. He placed his hands on both sides of her seat and looked straight into her eyes. He said slowly, Then let's go to the hospital for a check, okay? Qin Mu shut up, but after a while she whispered, The child isn't yours. Chapter 2672. He looked at her and said slowly, You have another man? Her face blushed, unable to say it out loud. Gu Zhe let her go and buckled her seatbelt before starting the car. She realized that he was driving very slowly. Even though it wasn't rush hour and he could drive a little faster, he was still driving carefully at 40 kilometers per hour. After going through a few streets, he parked the car in a high-end neighborhood. He lived in a 4-story bungalow with 2 units on each floor. Each unit took up about 300 square meters of land. Gu Zhe opened the car door and got out, still wanting to carry her. Even though Qin Mu refused, he insisted. He carried her to his house. It was huge, much bigger than Qin Chen's apartment. However, it was clearly a place for a single man. There wasn't a single part of it that was gentle and beautiful. Gu Zhe carried her and walked to the innermost room. He opened the door and carried her in. She thought that it would be his study room or something since he said he had something to talk to her about. However, she didn't expect it to be a studio. There were all sorts of photos hanging on the walls, but every single one of them was of her. Some of them she couldn't even remember where they were, but they were all captured beautifully. Qin Mu looked at them in a daze before looking at Gu Zhe. I took them all. You can come down and take a look. There's a carpet in here. He put her down and stood beside her. Qin Mu looked at them one by one. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't shocked. These photos spanned across her entire teenage years and even included her and Zhou Chongguang after their marriage. Qin Mu, these are my 8 years. Gu Zhe's voice rang out faintly. 8 years that I couldn't control. He looked at her. If your marriage with Zhou Chongguang was even a little blissful, I wouldn't have shown you my dark thoughts. But now. He placed one hand on her waist and the other on her stomach. You're pregnant. Qin Mu, I can't let you make your own decisions anymore. With that, he gently hugged her and whispered in her ear, Mu, let me take care of you and the child. Qin Mu's eyes were a little hot, and her body was a little stiff. Yes, the person who had sex with her was Gu Zhe, but she didn't feel like he was the father of the child. Even though he had given her so much warmth, she still didn't feel it. Subconsciously, she felt that the child was hers alone. Perhaps it was because she had no recollection of the process of making the child, so this child had appeared out of nowhere. Her little face was forced to rest on his shoulder. She was in a daze for a long time. Gu Zhe continued, Qin Mu, say it, okay? His feelings were a little complicated, but ever since he found out that she was pregnant, he had done it without thinking. Not only did he love her, he really wanted to take care of her. And that child. Perhaps in the future, they would have another child, and he would raise this child as his own. In the future, even if Qin Mu hated him, he wouldn't regret it. He couldn't refuse. Qin Mu didn't say anything. Her heart was in a mess. After a long time, she gently pushed Gu Zhe away and said with difficulty, Gu Zhe, I can't be with you because of a child. I need to think about it. Chapter 2673. Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't want to answer. He knew the answer. He had always been gentle to her, but at this moment, he was unusually strong. He took a step forward and pulled her into his arms. Ignoring her struggle, he said in a low voice, Don't move, the child is still young. Qin Mu's body froze for a moment and she didn't dare to move anymore. Gu Zhe kept hugging her and said softly, No matter what you think, I have to take care of the birth of this child. He held her shoulders and said seriously, I'm the father of the child, aren't I? Qin Mu was stunned and didn't say anything for a long time. It's a deal. He smiled. From today onwards, move here. I'll send you to work, have lunch together, and pick you up after work. Also, if you don't feel well, you can stay at home. I can help you deal with some things. He said it very firmly. For the first time, she knew that Gu Zhe was such a strong man. For a moment, she was speechless. Are you stupid? He smiled and reached out to touch her hair. You can think about it during the whole pregnancy. Do you want to accept my proposal or do you want to raise this child together? There was a faint threat in his words, as if he wanted to drag it out with her to the end. If she didn't agree, there would be a dispute after the child was born. Qin Mu frowned. Gu Zhe, I need to think about it. I'll give you time to think about it. He said as he leaned over and kissed her hair. Qin Mu looked up. No, I mean I can't move to live here. What did it look like moving here? It was more like living together. His eyes were burning. Then I'll move to your place. I just don't know if Qin Chen will mind. After all, it's her house, isn't it? It seemed that he only gave her 2 choices. Qin Mu looked down. After a long time she said in a low voice, Gu Zhe, I will consider our relationship. Please don't force me, okay? She took a deep breath. I haven't forgotten about Zhou Chongguang. At that moment, Gu Zai's expression was rather ugly. His thin lips were tightly pursed, but it only took a moment for him to regain his composure. He stroked her long hair and said, I know. Qin Mu looked at him uneasily and slowly expressed her thoughts. Actually, you don't have to. Force yourself to take responsibility. I will give birth to the child and you can take care of him. Gu Zai, you can even get married. This child won't affect anything. His gaze turned cold. He thought he knew what she was thinking. What she meant was that he had no choice but to raise a child by himself. However, he felt somewhat bitter in his heart. The child was indeed not his. Gu Zai, you're just using that misunderstanding to force her to be with you. It's good enough that she's able to speak her mind to you. His expression was ugly, but he still nodded. Okay, then you live by yourself. I'll drive you. She still wanted to say something, but he interrupted her. Qin Mu, this is my biggest concession. Qin Mu thought about it seriously and nodded gently. Okay. He stroked her cheek with his palm. His voice was a little hoarse. Also, promise me that you will consider our relationship, okay? She looked at him for a long time before she nodded again. Gu Zai smiled and pinched her cheek. His voice was hoarse. I'll go cook. You probably want to eat something light. Qin Mu smiled. Gu Zai turned around and was about to leave when he walked back. Chapter 2674. He pressed one hand on her shoulder, leaned over, and kissed the corner of her mouth lightly. Qin Mu couldn't avoid it, so she didn't move. Gu Zai murmured, Qin Mu, I'm very happy. Qin Mu looked at him with a confused expression, and he looked into her eyes. In her eyes, he saw the shadow of Zhou Chongguang. However, it didn't matter. He could wait. He had waited for 8 years for this day. He believed that they could be together. Gu Zai gently caressed her eyelids a few times, his eyes filled with endless love. He did like her, so he didn't care about this child. He could tell from her expression how much she liked children, so as long as she liked it, he could accept it. He wasn't a young boy anymore. He knew what he wanted. Gu Zai smiled and said in a hoarse voice, I'm going to cook. You stay here for a while. If you want to go out, there are slippers at the door. Remember not to go barefoot. Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. She didn't remember where she had read that pregnant women were easily moved and less guarded. She didn't know if she belonged to this category now. She would be particularly moved by what Gu Zai did for her. It wasn't to the point of being moved, but she didn't want to refuse. She stood there, looking at the photos he had taken for her, looking at the man who had loved her for 8 years. It would be a lie to say that she didn't have any thoughts, but she was still a little confused. Her relationship with Zhou Chongguang came so hastily, but it ended in heartache. She didn't want it to be the same with Gu Zai. Yes, he loved her, was very tolerant of her, and was very good to her. But she didn't love him, so it was unfair to him. Qin Mu thought about this and felt that he had to wait for Gu Zai to calm down before having a good talk with him. In the kitchen, Gu Zai took the tablet and made a series of pregnant meals. He planned to make one meal tonight and go to the supermarket tomorrow to buy some ingredients. Qin Mu was too thin. She had been in a bad mood before, so her complexion wasn't particularly good. Now that she was pregnant, she should nourish herself well. He heard from her assistant that she was retching, so he guessed that she didn't have a good appetite. After thinking about it, he finally decided to make her a seafood porridge with a light flavor. He did it skillfully and didn't notice that Qin Mu had quietly walked in. She stood in the kitchen doorway watching, head cocked to one side. Gu Zai was a good man. He was a good man at home, and when he was outside he was also good. He was also the father of her child. Qin Mu felt that it should not be difficult to like him. However, perhaps because she was old, it was hard for her to rekindle the fire of infatuation with Zhou Chongguang like before. She smiled faintly and then remembered that she was only 23 years old. If she and Gu Zai were together, would they be an old married couple? Would Gu Zai get tired of a wife who was always calm and unperturbed? So for his own good, she had to think it through carefully. When Gu Zai noticed her presence, he turned his handsome face sideways. She smiled and said, "The photos you take are very good. If the company closes down in the future, you can open a photo studio." He glanced at her. "I think you can help rich women take artistic photos." That way you can earn money faster. After all, it's not easy to raise a family. Qin laughed. Guze, when did you become so immoral? He looked at her and said softly. Not when I fell in love with a married woman. She was sad. Chapter 2675. She looked up and smiled. It doesn't matter. I haven't agreed to be with you yet, so you can say it. If we get together one day, there's no need to say these things anymore. He smiled back and went back to cook the seafood porridge for her. When she sat at the dining table and tasted it carefully, Guze was actually a little nervous. He was afraid that she wouldn't like it and that she wouldn't have an appetite. Qin held the spoon and sniffed it. Then she looked up at him and said lightly, "It smells good." He smiled back. "It's good that you like it. Try it." Because she didn't have a good appetite, he put in something light. Qin smiled and took a sip. It did taste good. Then, she drank the porridge in small bites. It was warm and sweaty, but it was indescribably comfortable. Guze asked softly, "Do you want another bowl?" She shook her head. "No, I'm afraid I'll vomit if I eat too much." Guze nodded understandingly. "That's good. Let's have some fruit tonight." Qin grunted in acknowledgement. She sat and watched him eat the porridge calmly. He drank unhurriedly and occasionally looked up at her. When their eyes met, Qin would smile. Guze couldn't help but reach out and rub her long hair. "You look a little silly." She didn't avoid him, but she didn't give him too much of a response. Her feelings for him were at most a comfortable friend. She didn't hate him. She didn't have any more feelings for him. As for the baby's father, her fingers touched her belly. It was still hard for her to accept that she was pregnant with Guze's child. It was still hard for her to imagine the baby coming out with Guze's face. However, she didn't say these words. She had been drugged back then, and Guze, well, he had worked hard to help her get rid of it. Qin was a little sleepy when she was pregnant. Later, Guze arranged for her to sit on the sofa. When he cleaned up the kitchen, she accidentally fell asleep. When Guze was done with everything and quietly walked back to the living room, he saw Qin sleeping on the sofa with her little face slanted. His brown hair was spread out at his side, and his face was buried in his hair, looking a little pale. Sighing in his heart, he slowly walked over and knelt beside her. He lifted her long hair with his large hands and stared at her exquisite facial features. Qin was still very young. There was not a trace of age on her face. He vaguely remembered that she was only 23 years old. He ran his fingers through her long hair, feeling its smoothness. He had desired her for so long, and now she was right in front of him. Guze couldn't help but lean over and gently touch the corner of her mouth. Qin didn't wake up, but the corners of her mouth curled up as if she was having a good dream. His slender fingers tickled her, and he smiled faintly. Then, he gently picked her up and walked to the master bedroom. He didn't even think about it. She would be his in the future, so it was normal for them to be intimate. Qin body was very soft and light, so he easily carried her back to the master bedroom. When he placed her on the soft bed, she seemed to wake up for a moment, and her slender arms wrapped around his neck. At that moment, Guze was ecstatic. He looked down at the person in his arms and saw that her eyes were still closed, and she looked lazy. Chapter 2676. Perhaps because she was not used to it, Qin voice sounded like a kitten. "Zhou Chongguang. Don't be like this. I want to sleep." She buried her face in the pillow and opened her red lips slightly. Her voice was husky and very charming. "Stop fooling around." Guze's tensed body froze. She called out Zhou Chongguang's name. If Guze did not know how important Zhou Chongguang was to her in the past, he knew it now. He was still kneeling on both sides of her body and did not lift his body for a long time. Quietly watching her little face in deep sleep. After a long time, he smiled bitterly and slowly straightened his body. He held her slippers and removed them for her. His movements were very gentle. Finally, he covered her with a thin blanket and kissed her cheek before leaving the master bedroom. At night, on the balcony, Guze stood in the dark with a little red between his fingers. He also stood quietly. He did not know how many cigarettes he had smoked, but he knew that he needed to smoke to calm down. Qin Mu's pregnancy was a turning point for him, but it seemed that he was even more hesitant. He rubbed his forehead with the cigarette between his fingers and smiled bitterly. In the past, he had seen Yimu Yun's excessive love for Tang Sher. It was almost twisted and domineering, and he found it a little unbelievable. Now, he had seen it for himself again. Yimu Yun's sister was not bad either. Her persistence was comparable to Yimu Yun's. Gu Zhe laughed softly, a little self-deprecating. However, he still did not want to give up. It was Zhou Chongguang who gave up. He was just following his heart. No one else could take care of Qin Mu as well as he did. Gu Zhe extinguished the cigarette and walked slowly back to the master bedroom. He took his bathrobe and took a shower. When he came out, he hesitated for a moment, but he still lifted the blanket and lay down beside her. Even if he could not do anything, he could only hold her shoulders and kiss her neck. He thought that slowly, she would get used to his presence, get used to his care, and forget that person. The night was getting darker. Gu Zhe had a sleepless night. On the other hand, Qin Mu slept all the way until dawn. When she opened her eyes, she saw Gu Zhe's enlarged handsome face. His breathing stagnated, and his body unconsciously retreated. Before she fell off the bed, Gu Zhe held her slender waist and said in a slightly nervous voice, "Be careful." Qin Mu was also shocked. For a moment, her face was expressionless, and she looked a little confused. She was originally a little girl. When she woke up early in the morning, her hair was a mess. It was not very pleasing to the eye, but it was the way he liked it. Gu Zhe smiled and tightened his arms. Her body leaned against him. He could feel that she was struggling for a moment, but he didn't care. He planted a light kiss on her forehead and said softly, "You fell asleep on the sofa last night, so I didn't wake you up. Do you mind sleeping in my bed for a night?" It was a little pretentious for Qin Mu to say that she minded. They had already slept together, so what else was there to say? She pursed her lips and smiled, choosing not to answer. Gu Zhe sat up. "Are you going to the art gallery today?" Qin Mu leaned against the headboard and thought for a moment. "I want to rest for the day." "That's good." He leaned over and kissed her. "I'll go make breakfast. Sleep a little longer, and I'll take you to the hospital later." Qin Mu widened her eyes. "Why are we going to the hospital?" Chapter 2677. Gu Zhe kissed the corner of her mouth and said with a faint smile, "Miss Qin, it's my first time too." He said it so seriously that Qin Mu couldn't do anything about it. After looking at him for a long time, she said in a low voice, "Then go." She had been too anxious yesterday, and she was a little ashamed. After all, she was a divorced woman. Pregnancy wouldn't be a glorious thing, so there were a lot of things she didn't ask clearly. She would rather ask a professional doctor than ask Qin Chen. When Gu Zhe was about to leave, Qin Mu grabbed his arm and said in a low voice, "Let's go to another hospital. Sheng. There are a lot of acquaintances there." A hint of a smile appeared in Gu Zhe's eyes. Then he reached out and touched her head. "Okay." There was a touch of love in his voice. It wasn't that she couldn't hear it, but she chose to ignore it. Gu Zhe's eyes fell on her face quietly. After a while, he got up to make breakfast. Qin Mu lay down, but she didn't fall asleep again. She put her fingers on her belly and quietly spaced out. Child, and Gu Zhe's child. She still didn't feel it was real. She quietly spaced out in the morning light. After a long time, she felt a little warm at the corner of her eyes. She reached out and touched it. It was wet and warm. When did she cry? Qin Mu stared blankly. She pursed her lips and bit her fist. She couldn't control herself, and tears fell from the corner of her eyes. She didn't know what was wrong with her. Maybe pregnant women just like to cry. But she knew that it was an excuse for herself. She's missing someone. She was pregnant with Gu Zhe's child, and thinking about Zhou Chongguang was a sin. But she couldn't help it. Pregnancy reminded her of the days when she desperately wanted a child. Those days were indelible memories of her and Zhou Chongguang's lives. She felt extremely useless and disappointing. "Qin Mu, you said that you wanted an important start, but now you're like this, it's embarrassing." She clenched her fists and desperately tried to suppress it. After a long time, she finally restrained herself and wanted to go to the bathroom to wash her face and see if her eyes were red. She didn't want Gu Zhe to see her like this. This was hurting him, and she vaguely knew it. However, as soon as she moved, she saw Gu Zhe standing at the bedroom door. There were clear tears on her face. She didn't have time to clean them up and just stared at him blankly. Gu Zhe's eyes were a bit deep. He quietly looked at her for a while and then smiled. Do you want to drink soy milk? If you want to drink it, I can grind it. Qin Mu nodded. Okay. Gu Zhe smiled again and didn't say anything. He turned around and left as if he didn't see the tears in the corner of her eyes. Qin Mu lowered her head. She knew that he was pretending not to see it. That was good. They both had face. She quickly went to clean herself up. When she walked out, she saw that Gu Zhe had already prepared breakfast. She sat down, picked up the handmade soy milk, and took a sip. Her gentleness probably had some kind of ingratiating meaning. Gu Zhe looked at her and ate breakfast silently. After breakfast, it was already 8:30. He raised his hand to look at the time and smiled. I'm driving to the hospital now. It's about 90 o'clock. There shouldn't be many people. Qin Mu nodded. Chapter 2678. He was afraid of scaring her away. She wanted to keep her distance, so she became so awkward. Gu Zhe took the car keys and a thin jacket to put on her shoulders. It's windy outside. Use it to block the wind. She replied with an "oh" and didn't refuse. Anyway, after the checkup, she would tell him that she was going home. They could take it slow. She couldn't accept living together like this. Gu Zhe's thoughts were different from hers. He wanted to convince her to live together. On one hand, it was to nurture their relationship. On the other hand, he really wanted to take care of her. Also, he wanted to be with her. He couldn't bear to see her suffer even the slightest bit of rumors. He wanted to let others know that the child had a father. Gu Zhe got into the car and looked at her sideways. He smiled faintly and drove to the People's Hospital of B City. This was the hospital that Qin Mu had designated. She said that it was a public hospital, so it was not easy to bump into someone familiar. He thought that it was true. Most of the people in her circle went to expensive private hospitals. It was unlikely that she would bump into someone familiar in a public hospital. An hour later, the car stopped in the parking lot. The sun was scorching and the wind was quite strong. Qin Mu felt that the jacket was still useful. She wore a hat to block the sun. After walking for about 2 minutes, they entered the clinic building. Gu Zhe let her sit on the bench while he went to register for the obstetrics and gynecology department. There were a lot of people registering. He queued for about 10 minutes. Qin Mu looked at Gu Zhe for a while before retracting his gaze. Then, he lowered his gaze and looked at his stomach. Her stomach was very flat. If it wasn't for the checkup, she wouldn't have believed that there was a child inside. Qin Mu reached out and touched her stomach gently. Her expression was very gentle. Hello, little one. Of course, she was silly. The little one in her stomach was still too small to respond to her. She touched it again. I'm a mother. As she said that, she laughed. So this was how pregnancy felt. It was beautiful. Qin Mu felt that she was really not picky because she was too desperate. She was really not picky about the child's father when she was pregnant. It seemed that no matter whose child it was a treasure and she had to give birth to it. In her heart, she loved this child very much. Just being pregnant made her feel very happy. Qin Mu's little happiness was seen by the man in the corridor. Zhou Chongguang had lost a lot of weight. He stood not far away and looked at Qin Mu in shock. He was very familiar with her expression. This was how a woman looked when she was pregnant. She looked forward to the arrival of a little life, and the love on her face could not be concealed. The blood in his entire body was almost frozen. Only his brain could operate sluggishly, and only a few words could be written in his head. Qin Mu was pregnant. She was pregnant. Was it Gu Zhe's child? Even if he and she had once that day, but he did not dare to believe that it was his seed. They had tried so many times in the past, but they had never gotten pregnant. Recently, he heard that Gu Zhe was chasing after her, and they ended up together and had a child so soon. Zhou Chongguang looked at the expression on her face greedily, and his fingers clenched into a fist. Zhou Chongguang, you should be happy for her. She is pregnant, and she has always wanted a child. She has a child with Gu Zhe, and she has a complete family. She is a complete woman, And Mumu is very good. She will also treat Shuemu well. He lowered his eyes and thought bitterly, this really couldn't be any better. Chapter 2679. Zhou Chongguang just watched and watched for a long time before he smiled softly. Then, he saw Gu Zhe slowly walking back. Gu Zhe bent down and whispered to Qin Mu. He saw Gu Zhe's expression was very gentle. Qin Mu raised her head and kept looking at Gu Zhe. Her eyes were also very focused. They looked like the most ordinary couple in the world. Zhou Chongguang's eyes were a little hot. Yes, they were together. Moreover, with Gu Zhe's age, it was expected that he was eager to get married. As for the child, it was probably an accident. It was a pleasant surprise. Soon they would get married. Zhou Chongguang took a step back and hid in the darkness of the corridor. His face was a little desolate. His tightly closed eyes showed the struggle and pain in his heart. After a long time, he slowly walked out, but Qin Mu and Gu Zhe were nowhere to be seen. Thinking about it, they must have gone upstairs for a checkup. Zhou Chongguang clenched his fingers. At his fingertips, there was a test report, on which was the latest condition of his body. The doctor's words were gentle but cruel. Mr. Zhou, your illness can't be delayed any longer. The hospital is looking for a suitable liver source, but they haven't found the right one yet. I know Mr. Zhou has your own connections. You should also try your best. The doctor paused. Mr. Zhou, you know that time waits for no man. As long as there is a glimmer of hope, we don't want to give up. Mr. Zhou, don't give up either. The doctor looked at the man in front of him. The man who once appeared in all the major financial magazines was full of vigor. But now, he was full of fatigue and lost weight after the illness. Originally, he should have been hospitalized. However, Zhou Chongguang insisted on not being hospitalized. He requested to take conservative medicine for treatment. It should be known that it was far from enough. If he didn't wait for a suitable liver source, he might already be dead. Zhou Chongguang's fingers clenched the test report. He smiled softly. Now he could calmly wait for death. In this world, the people and things that he was reluctant to part with no longer belonged to him. He raised his eyes and looked at the blazing white lights on the ceiling of the hospital. He smiled a little desolately. Mumu, he will be fine, right? At this moment, a large hand grabbed his shoulder, and the test report in his hand was forcibly taken away. Startled, he lowered his head and saw Zhao Zi's furious and pained face. Chongguang, you're crazy. Zhao Zi looked at the test report quickly and pursed his thin lips tightly. You don't want to live anymore, do you? Therefore, she hid herself and lived in the house that she used to live with Qin Mu. She didn't see anyone and didn't care about the company's affairs. The Zhou Chongguang he knew was not like this. He followed him and finally understood the reason. Liver disease, late stage. Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly and gently snatched the test report. He tore it into pieces and threw it away. As you can see, it's the late stage. There's no difference whether we treat him or not. The difference is that you don't want to live anymore. Zhao Zi's eyes were full of pain. Chongguang, you weren't like this in the past. If you like Qin Mu, go get her. What are you doing? Do you want Qin Mu to shed a few tears in front of your grave after you die? Chapter 2680. Then try your best to cure yourself. You have money, and sometimes money isn't everything. It just happens to be able to exchange for a life. Zhao Zi grabbed his collar and raised his body rudely. Zhou Chongguang still looked at Zhao Zi quietly, and suddenly laughed softly, and then Zhao Zi saw that Zhou Chongguang's eyes were filled with warmth, an expression that Zhao Zi had never seen before. Zhou Chongguang murmured, Zi, she's pregnant. She's pregnant with Gu Zhe's child. Tell me, how can I compete with Gu Zhe? With that, his thin lips raised into a smile that was uglier than crying. When I recover, she'll have given birth to a child. Zhao Zi was stunned, and his hand loosened. He stared blankly at Zhou Chongguang, and his body suddenly took 2 steps back. His eyes were fixed on Zhou Chongguang. Zhou Chongguang took out another cigarette from his pocket and smoked quietly. Zhao Zi's voice was hoarse and hoarse. Are you crazy? Why are you smoking at this time? Don't you want to live anymore? Yes, I don't want to live anymore. Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly. There's no point in living anymore. The flesh on Zhao Zi's face twitched a few times, then he walked over, clenched his hand into a fist, and forcefully punched Zhou Chongguang's shoulder. His voice carried a hint of coldness. Zhou Chongguang, what is this? What is this, huh? We grew up together, and we created this glorious era together. You say you don't want to live anymore. Is it worth it for a woman? With that, he fiercely punched Zhou Chongguang's face to the side. Zhou Chongguang, are you worthy of me? You risked your life for Tang Sher, and now for Qin Mu, you don't even want a brother, is that it? Zhou Chongguang's body fell heavily on the wall, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood, but he didn't care at all. With trembling hands, he brought the cigarette to his lips and took a deep breath. Is there only a woman in your heart? Is a woman everything to you? Zhao Zi's voice was hoarse. Our brotherhood, our glory, the days we grew up together, are they nothing to you? With that, he stepped forward and held his neck. His face was almost distorted. Do you want to die? It's easy to die if you want to. Come, let's go to the rooftop together and jump down together. We'll die a clean death. Tomorrow, we can even go on social news together. Director Zhou's true love is me. How sensational would that be? It's much better than you waiting for death in silence. Zhao Zi's voice was very fierce, but there was a drop of tear in the corner of his eye, but it didn't fall. Zhou Chongguang coughed violently, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. He closed his eyes weakly and smiled. Z, why do you have to bet your life on me? Why didn't I know you like men? I like them now. It's none of your business. Zhao Zi's voice was even more hoarse, and it was almost like a rascal, as if he had returned to the time when they were in their 20s. They had disputes, they fought, and it was always him who was unreasonable, while Zhou Chongguang was always the one who gave in to him. This time, he wanted to be the same. Zhou Chongguang laughed, and he tilted his head. You like me, but you still hit me? Zhao Zi was in tears. He wiped his tears and laughed self-deprecatingly. Hitting is affection, scolding is love, I've never heard of it. Chapter 2681. Zhou Chongguang looked into his eyes and said softly, Z, I'll leave the glory to you, okay? I have nothing left but glory. Okay, let's get married in America. Your assets will be mine. If you can't do it and still don't give up on Qin Mu, then don't fucking talk about death. Zhao Zi grabbed his collar again roughly. Just fucking live. Zhou Chongguang didn't resist and couldn't resist. He was a patient now. He looked at Zhao Zi and smiled faintly. Z, when did you become so rude? When you said you were going to give me all your assets. Zhao Zi was still holding his collar, and his expression wasn't very good. Then he stared at him coldly. What do you say? Zhou Chongguang looked at his serious face and couldn't help but laugh out loud. It was probably because he laughed too hard that he suddenly coughed out a mouthful of blood. He looked very pathetic. Zhao Zi was angry at first, so he was especially rude. But seeing him like this, he finally couldn't bear to let him go and patted his back. How are you? I'm fine. It's an old illness. Zhou Chongguang said and wanted to smoke again. But Zhao Zi took the cigarette away from his hand. You're still smoking at this time. I don't want to be your widow. Zhou Chongguang glared at him and then reached out to touch Zhao Zi's forehead. It's not hot. Z, do you have some other illness, or were you hurt by a girl? You hurt me. Zhao Zi said unhappily and then dragged Zhou Chongguang out. Let's go, I'll take care of you from now on. This hospital won't come anymore. He knew that seeing Qin Mu, Zhou Chongguang would probably feel bad. This illness couldn't be cured even if he wanted to. Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly. You really want to marry me? Can your mom accept me as her son-in-law? Who was Zhao Zi? He was the brother he grew up with. He glared at him and said, You wish. Based on your current situation, you deserve to be my mother's daughter-in-law. Zhou Chongguang laughed and coughed at the same time. I regret it, Z. Zhao Zi threw him into the car and got in again. He looked at him sideways. What are you regretting? With that said, he started the car. The meaning in Zhou Chongguang's eyes was unclear. I should have married you back then. Then, the car with good performance floated for a moment, but Zhao Zi quickly turned it around. He looked at the man beside him meaningfully. You're sick in the liver, but your brain is fine. I'm straight. As he spoke, he laughed again. I'll treat you well. After I recover, maybe I'll consider you. Zhou Chongguang just smiled. After a long time, he closed his eyes and said softly, "Let me know when Z gets home. I'm a little tired, and, thank you." At this time, it was quite good to have someone accompany him. He even thought that if Qin Mu got married, and he brought Z to tell her that he and Z were together, would she be surprised? That expression would definitely be very cute. Also, if Z knew that he was thinking like this, would he beat him up? The corner of Zhou Chongguang's mouth curled up slightly, and his handsome face had lost a lot of weight. Chapter 2682. The white sports car sped on the road of B City and slowly drove to the quiet private driveway. Zhou Chongguang was now living in the villa that he and Qin Mu used to live in. He didn't hire many servants, so the villa was very quiet. When Zhao Zi parked the car, he looked at him sideways. Seeing that he was sleeping soundly, he didn't disturb him and sat quietly in the car to wait. Zhou Chongguang was a big man, so it was naturally inconvenient for him to carry him in. Even if Zhou Chongguang's current weight should be no more than 110 kilograms, Zhao Zi felt that it was enough for him to think of that scene. He sat for a long time, about an hour, before Zhou Chongguang woke up. As soon as he opened his eyes, he heard a very faint voice beside him. "Haven't you slept well recently?" Zhou Chongguang slowly sat up straight, and his voice was a little unnatural. "How did you know?" Zhao Zi turned his face and looked into his eyes. "You used to be a vigilant person. You wouldn't fall asleep when someone was driving." Zhou Chongguang smiled. "My body isn't very good." "Chongguang, why torture yourself?" Zhao Zi said softly. "Listen to me and treat your illness well. Can we talk about Qin Mu later? At worst, you still have a memory. If you are gone, the memory will be gone." Zhou Chongguang was slightly stunned. Zhao Zi suddenly took out a stack of photos from the cabinet in front of him and handed them to Zhou Chongguang. "I came to you for this." Zhou Chongguang took it and looked at it. What he saw were pictures of mangled flesh and blood. He was stunned for a moment and could guess who the owner of the photos was. There was no warmth in Zhao Zi's voice. It was even cruel. "I don't think you'll be happy that she turned herself into Qin Mu. Furthermore, she's also the person who indirectly harmed Gu Mei. The way she is now is pretty good. Also, she's living in the house that Gu Mei used to live in. Gu Mei's photos are everywhere." Chi Chi went crazy after being locked up for a day. Zhou Chongguang didn't want to hear the rest of the conversation. He raised his hand and closed his eyes. His voice sounded tired. "Z, I feel like I had a very long dream." "Then do it. Don't wake up. Whether the future is good or bad, at least I'm still here." Zhao Zi smiled and punched him. "Isn't that right? I'm still here." Zhou Chongguang opened his eyes and looked into Zhao Zi's eyes. Zhao Zi said softly, "Chongguang, you don't have nothing. You still have me. You still have the love that Qin Mu once had. You still have Shui Mu. You gave him to Gu Zai and Qin Mu, but you're still his father." Zhou Chongguang looked at Zhao Zi for a long time and smiled faintly. He didn't say anything, but Zhao Zi knew that Chongguang probably didn't want to die. He let out a long sigh in his heart. In this day and age, if you want to convince someone, you have to pretend to be rotten. In the hospital, Qin Mu and Gu Zai were both sitting there. The doctor looked at the test results from yesterday and raised his delicate eyebrows. "She's pregnant." Then he looked at Gu Zai and then at Qin Mu. "Husband and wife?" Qin Mu shook her head. Chapter 2683. The female doctor placed the form in Gu Zai's hand and smiled meaningfully. "It's much more troublesome than making a child." Gu Zai looked at the abortion form in his hand, then at the female doctor. Her bright red nails and lipstick, and then her overly low neckline and slightly picky gaze. He leaned over and gently stuffed the test form into the female doctor's collar. Jun Yen leaned over and said, "Miss, I'm not married. She's my girlfriend, but I'm preparing to get married." His lips were very close, and he almost whispered, "Your attitude at work is like taking revenge on society." After saying that, He held Qin Mu's small hand under the female doctor's dumbfounded expression and said in an indisputable tone, "Go to the private hospital. I'm not going to shung you on." Qin Mu had one last insistence. Gu Zhe tilted his head to look at her and ruffled her hair. "Listen to me on this, Qin Mu stood face to face with him. She looked at his handsome face and listened to his voice. For a moment, she was in a daze. Listen to him. This feeling overlapped with the past. She felt as if she had returned to the past, back to the best time with Zhou Chongguang. "What are you thinking about?" Gu Zhe held her hand tightly. "If you don't say anything, I'll take it as a yes, right?" He held Qin Mu's hand as they walked forward. She felt like she was being protected. She turned her head and looked at the female doctor, who was still in a daze. Qin Mu suddenly stopped and said mischievously, "I'm divorced, and now I'm preparing to get married." The female doctor's face twisted. She had been slapped in the face. After Qin Mu finished speaking, she didn't feel that she had said anything outrageous. She was still smiling when they walked out, and she didn't see Gu Zhe's slightly meaningful gaze. Look at her expression. I'm dying of laughter. She must think that a divorced woman like me doesn't deserve you. Qin Mu lowered her head and smiled softly. She rarely had such a bad time. Suddenly, Gu Zhe stopped in his tracks. She was forced to stop as well. She raised her head and asked in confusion, "Gu Zhe, what's wrong?" "What about you? What do you think?" Gu Zhe's voice was hoarse as he asked softly. Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't know how to answer him. "You said that you are divorced and are going to get married soon. Is that true?" Gu Zhe did not allow her to retreat. He held her chin with one hand and forced her to answer. Qin Mu bit her lip. "I just want to piss her off. I've never seen a doctor like her. She doesn't respect life at all. How can you joke about something like this?" His voice was even more hoarse, and his eyes were burning. Qin Mu wanted to step back, but he held her slender waist and said in a hoarse voice, "Tell me, Mu." Qin Mu stammered, "You said it first." "But I'm not joking. I'm serious about my plan." His expression was also serious. Qin Mu was speechless for a moment and just looked at him in the hospital hall. This was indeed a good opportunity, but she was too weak and wanted to run away. In the end, he didn't want to force her, so he said lightly, "Forget it. Let's talk about it later." They walked to the elevator, but the elevator was broken, so they could only take another elevator down. On the first floor, as soon as Qin Mu got out of the elevator, she saw that there was a little blood on the marble in the corridor, which had not yet dried. Qin Mu whispered, "So much blood." Chapter 2684. Gu Zhe looked at the blood and said in a low voice, "Maybe someone was injured." Qin Mu looked up and nodded. Then she walked to the parking lot with Gu Zhe. When she was about to get in the car, Qin Mu's eyes stopped. She saw Zhou Chongguang's car. It was a very low-key Land Rover, which Zhou Chongguang often drove. Was he also in the hospital now? Qin Mu pursed her lips and looked at the car. Gu Zhe naturally saw it too. He followed her gaze and said lightly, "Do you want to wait here?" Qin Mu looked away and smiled. "No need." Gu Zhe opened the car door for her. After she got in, he went around to the other side and got in. When he started the car, he looked at the car through the rearview mirror. His eyes were a little deep. Because Qin Mu insisted on going back to her apartment, he drove in the direction of her apartment. Along the way, Gu Zhe was talking about the precautions of pregnant women, but Qin Mu was always a little absent-minded. When they arrived at her apartment, Gu Zhe stopped the car and looked at her sideways. He said softly, "Mumu is here." She let out an "ob" and was obviously a little absent-minded. Gu Zhe smiled gently and rubbed her hair. "We're home. I'll send you up." Qin Mu shook her head. "I can go up by myself." "Gu Zhe, thank you." He put his hand on the steering wheel and said with a faint smile in his eyes, "Mumu, if you say thank you again in the future, I will kiss you." His voice became gentler. "I'm serious." Qin Mu looked at him and smiled helplessly. "All right." She opened the door and got out of the car. Gu Zhe watched her go upstairs and then started the car. He didn't go to the company, nor did he go home. Instead, he drove to the hospital. He guessed that it was no coincidence that Zhou Chongguang's car had appeared at the hospital. When they arrived at the hospital, Zhou Chongguang's car was still there. Gu Zhe sat in the car, her jade-like fingers gently tapping on the steering wheel. After thinking for a while, she got out of the car and walked straight to the outpatient hall. The patient's information was usually confidential, but he couldn't resist using his connections. Zhou Chongguang's identity was special, so Gu Zhe spent 2 million to buy his medical records. Half an hour later, he sat in the car with a stack of photocopies in his hand. He flipped through them page by page, and the more he read, the more shocked he became. Liver transplant. Otherwise, Zhou Chongguang would not be able to live. Was that why he gave up on Qin Mu and Shui Mu? Gu Zhe placed the document on the shelf, leaned back in his chair, and stared at it for a long time. He smoked one cigarette after another, and his eyes were a little indifferent. Qin Mu's child was Zhou Chongguang's. Zhou Chongguang probably wouldn't live long. And could he really keep Mu Mu by his side safely? When she was still in love with Zhou Chongguang. If Qin Mu loved him, then no matter whether Zhou Chongguang was dead or alive, no matter who the child was, she would be Gu Zhe's woman. But no. Everything belonged to Zhou Chongguang. He, Gu Zhe, was just a person who stood in the dark and picked up the leftovers. He was so happy, but in the end, the reality was so cruel. Zhou Chongguang was cruel to himself, but he was also cruel to Gu Zhe. If he died, would Gu Zhe be at ease for the rest of his life if he married Qin Mu and raised their child? Chapter 2685. Gu Zhe sat in the car and waited for a long time. Until tonight, Zhou Chongguang's car still hadn't been driven by anyone. He knew that he wouldn't be able to wait any longer. Since he couldn't wait any longer, he could go look for someone else. Gu Zhe started the car slowly with a cold expression on his face. An hour later, the car stopped in front of the villa in Qingshui Road. This used to be Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang's love nest. It was the place that Gu Zhe was most unfamiliar with. The sports car stopped in front of the main entrance. He got out of the car and closed the door. The guard looked at him. "May I know who you're looking for?" "I'm looking for Zhou Chongguang." Gu Zhe lit a cigarette and blew out a smoke ring. The guard hesitated for a long time before saying, "Vice President Zhao said that no one is allowed in. Zhou Zong needs to rest." Rest? He was waiting for death. Gu Zhe sneered and held the cigarette between his fingers. "Call him on the inside. Tell him that I'm Gu Zhe." The guard looked at him for a long time and finally made the call. He said carefully, "Mr. Zhou, there's a Mr. Gu looking for you." "He won't say anything." The guard said something on the other end and the guard opened the black door. As he opened it he said, "Mr. Zhou isn't feeling well. Mr. Gu, don't disturb him for too long." Gu Zhe didn't drive in. He walked in directly. The villa wasn't big and it only took him 2 minutes to reach the main entrance. Zhou Chongguang was sitting in the hall on the first floor. He was wearing a black bathrobe. It looked a little thick in the hot weather. He sat there with a few magazines scattered around him, looking somewhat relaxed. Gu Zhe walked over slowly and sat opposite him. The two men looked at each other. After a long time, Zhou Chongguang said, "Tea or coffee?" "Water is fine." Gu Zhe's voice was calm. Zhou Chongguang raised his hand and called for a servant. He calmly ordered, "Go pour 2 cups of plain water." After a while, 2 cups of water were placed on the table. Gu Zhe noticed that it was hot. His brows furrowed slightly. "Has it reached this point?" "Yes, I'm just waiting for the liver transplant." Zhou Chongguang smiled faintly and slowly drank the water. His expression was very calm, as if he did not care about his own illness. Gu Zhe's gaze moved from his face to the cup on the table, and his voice became softer. "Why didn't you cooperate with the treatment?" He looked up again. "Why aren't you hospitalized?" "Zhou Chongguang, you didn't try your best to save your own life." Zhou Chongguang gazed into the distance and a charming smile appeared on his face. "Gu Zhe, do you know that this is my home? I don't want to leave this place. Living here I feel at ease. Even if it's painful, I feel a sense of comfort here." Here, it seemed that Mu Mu could come back at any time and sleep in the bedroom upstairs. It seemed that she could come out of the bathroom at any time and complain to him. "Zhou Chongguang, I'm so tired." It also seemed that he could touch her body as soon as he stretched out his hand while lying down. Even if it was air that he often caught. Zhou Chongguang smiled. His thin face was calm and handsome. Gu Zei's expression loosened. He used to look down on Zhou Chongguang. He thought that he was a creature who thought for the rest of his life and that he was not worthy of Qin Mu. But he did not expect that he could do this for Qin Mu. This man was using death to persist in love. Who said that he would die without love? Chapter 2686. If you love her so much, why would you give up your own life? Gu Zei's voice was low. He reached out and tugged at him. Come with me now. Tell Qin Mu that you want to be with her. Gu Zei wasn't a good person. But now, he couldn't take it anymore. Listen, you only have one chance. After this day, I won't give in to you anymore. Do you understand? Gu Zei's gaze was cold. When he said these words, his entire body was cold. He wasn't a saint. He could be sad. As he said these words, his entire body was ice cold. He was not a saint, and he too would feel sad. As a patient, Zhou Chongguang was naturally no match for him. But he didn't expect Zhao Zi to come back. President Gu, you're a little ugly now. Zhao Zi smiled and walked over. It's bad enough that you're with Qin Mu, but you're also taking Zhou Chongguang into your harem? Gu Zei was a little confused by these words. He couldn't help but let go of the water. Zhao Zi, what do you mean? That was too harsh. Zhao Zi smiled and put his arm around Zhou Chongguang's shoulder. I couldn't tell that we're together. Why don't we take a photo and upload it on Weibo tomorrow? The title will be us. What do you think, Gu Zei? Gu Zei was shocked. He looked at Zhou Chongguang and then looked at Zhao Zi. He still hadn't digested it. You don't understand? It's literally what it means. Chongguang and I are together. Zhao Zi said calmly. And Gu Zei was dizzy. He didn't know what to say. He heard that people could change their sexual orientation at some point. But was it possible for Zhou Chongguang and Zhao Zi? All right, President Gu, let's not disturb the patient. I'll send you out. You have something to say to me? Zhao Zi said. Let's talk on the way. Then he said something special. Well, I'm Chongguang's man now. If you have something to say, just talk to me. Don't bother him, okay? Gu Zei simply couldn't listen to it anymore. Zhou Chongguang, who was behind him, was also about to vomit blood. But if he could get rid of Gu Zei, he was still willing. He didn't care what Zhao Zi said anymore. Zhao Zi didn't care about his reputation or his face. Why would a dying man like him need these things? Thus, Zhou Chongguang calmly drank his tea while Gu Zei watched, which further solidified the relationship between them. Gu Zei pulled on his jacket and looked at Zhao Zi. Then let's talk outside. Zhao Zi smiled and followed him out. He even kindly handed a cigarette to Gu Zei. Have a puff. Then he said with some malicious intent, You're very conflicted right now, aren't you? Gu Zei glanced at him and didn't say anything. From what he knew, Zhao Zi was even more difficult to deal with than Zhou Chongguang because he didn't have a bottom line. He would do anything sneaky. Zhao Zi stood next to him and also smoked a cigarette. He said slowly, actually, I've been conflicted for a long time before I decided to be with Chongguang. You're lying. Gu Zei snorted coldly. He had already woken up from the shock and wouldn't believe his bullshit. Zhao Zi smiled. You know me quite well. Then he said softly, Take care of Qin Mu. He looked at Gu Zei. Regardless of whether she ends up with you or not, take care of her. After all, you like her, don't you? Take it as atonement for your sister. Chapter 2687. Gu Zei took a drag on his cigarette. What if I don't take care of him? It's up to Qin Mu. If she wants to marry you, you can marry her. Zhao Zi sounded sad. As for Chongguang, I'll take care of him. He patted Gu Zei's shoulder. Men also have pride and dignity. Do you want him to beg Qin Mu to come back like this? Do you want her sympathy or love? Gu Zei's hand trembled. He looked at Zhao Zi and said, Do you think I'm so great? I'm taking care of my wife and son for someone else? If you have the ability, take it away. Zhao Zi laughed. If you have the ability to take it away, I really dare to be with Zhou Chongguang. Gu Zei had an indescribable expression on his face again. Just the thought of two men being together was enough to hurt his eyes. He snorted. You seem to be very confident. No, we have to accept fate. Zhao Zi was very calm, however. If the two of them get back together in the end. Gu Zhe, why don't we make do with each other? As he spoke, his gaze landed on Gu Zhe's face. Actually, you're not bad looking. Gu Zhe frowned. Zhao Zi, you don't really like men, do you? It's possible. Zhao Zi smiled and threw the cigarette butt on the ground. I'm not going to keep you company. Go back. Don't tell Qin Mu about Chongguang. Gu Zhe was stunned and then he looked into the hall. Zhou Chongguang was sitting there and reading a magazine. He looked very relaxed. Zhao Zi said in a low voice, you see, he's fine now. I'll take care of him. Gu Zhe left. When he was driving, his mind was filled with Zhao Zi's words. Don't tell Qin Mu. Was he really not going to tell her? Zhou Chongguang gave up just like that? What if he told Qin Mu? He knew in his heart that Qin Mu would definitely go to see Zhou Chongguang. No matter what, it was impossible for her to be with him. Even if she thought the child was his. Gu Zhe's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and there was no expression on his face. It wasn't until the car stopped that he realized he had driven to Qin Mu's apartment. At this time, the sky was already dark. He sat in the dark car and smoked quietly. There were many times when he thought about going up to her and telling her. But every time he had this thought, Zhao Zi's words rang in his mind. He had never felt so conflicted before. Sitting there until late at night, he suddenly called Zhou Chongguang. If you're a man, then live well. When you recover, I'll tell Qin Mu. Who she wants to be with, it's up to her. Without waiting for Zhou Chongguang to reply, he hung up the phone. Then, he felt indescribably relaxed. He thought that he could pursue her properly. Even if she didn't choose him in the end, he wouldn't regret it. Love was about burning up the last trace of passion. Even if it turned into ashes in the end, at least it had once shone and warmed up. He wanted to be with her every day, let her happy. If she chose to be with him in the end, then he would continue to love her, and he would love her even more than before. If she chose Zhou Chongguang, he would let go. Gu Zhe smiled slightly, opened the car door, and walked towards the elevator. He used the backup card to swipe the elevator and went straight to the top floor. Chapter 2688. Can I borrow your kitchen to make supper? He asked in a low voice. Qin Mu looked at him for a long time before saying in a low voice, Did you specially come here to make it for me? I'm hungry. He smiled and entered without a trace. This was the first time he had been to her house. It was obvious that there were many luxurious items left behind by Qin Chen in the apartment. Anyone who had interacted with Qin Chen would know how exquisite his life was. On the contrary, Qin Mu, a girl, seemed to be much more ordinary. Many of the items were cheap items bought from ordinary boutiques. Although Gu Zhe could afford items like Qin Chen's, he didn't like to live in a pile of luxuries. For example, a cup of tea that cost hundreds of thousands was really unnecessary. He still liked things that were more ordinary, such as Qin Mu's habits. He quite liked them and felt very comfortable. Qin Mu didn't chase him away. She had convinced herself that he was the father of the child, so she was willing to let him in. Gu Zhe gave her a sense of security. He wasn't like Zhou Chongguang, who would go crazy at any time. He could be considered a very restrained man. She flipped her brown hair and smiled. The ingredients are in the kitchen. Go take a look yourself. Also, help me make one. I'm a little hungry. With that said, she walked to the sofa and picked up a laptop to read some information. Gu Zhe frowned. It's so late and you're still working? Also, you can't always use the computer when you're pregnant. He walked over and quickly turned off her laptop. Qin Mu raised her little face and glared at him. He smiled and pressed her shoulder. I'll go get you a glass of juice. With that said, he turned on the TV for her. You can watch this. Be good and wait. With that said, he rubbed her hair. Qin Mu smiled stiffly and didn't say anything. She watched him walk into the kitchen. To be honest, his back view was really good, slender and well-built. Qin Mu couldn't figure it out. Gu Zhe was good-looking, had a good figure, and was rich. Why did he always pester her, a divorced woman? But now she would not ask again. She already had a child. If he wanted to be by her side, then so be it. In the future, she would feel annoyed when she got tired of him. She felt awkward marrying Guzay, although she had a child. After all, she was pregnant with this child. It would be quite embarrassing if she went back to her parents' home to be taken care of. Now, Qin Chen's big mouth should have told everyone about her pregnancy. In the afternoon, she received messages from her dear mother, father, and brother. What was worse, Cher also knew about it. Cher even asked her who the father of the child was. How could Qin Mu say that? With a vague answer, Cher yelled, "It must be Zhou Chongguang, right? You must have slept with him again. I knew he was a poodle." Because of that sentence, she was in a daze for the whole afternoon. At this moment, she finally let Guzay in. She didn't want to think about Zhou Chongguang all the time. Otherwise, she would feel sorry for the child in her stomach. She touched her stomach. Guzay came out of the kitchen and looked at her with a burning gaze. "Did the child kick you? It's only a month. How would he know how to kick?" Qin Mu gestured. "He's only the size of a broad bean." Guzay's eyes were filled with a smile. "Then, you must tell me when he's older." Chapter 2689. Qin Mu smiled faintly. "All right." He put the juice in her palm. "Drink it slowly. I'll make dinner." Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. When Guzay went to the kitchen, she opened her notebook again and dealt with some things. She closed it before he came over. Guzay asked her to eat for half an hour. Qin Mu got up and walked into the dining room. Tonight's supper was very sumptuous. She could see that he put a lot of thought into it. "I only have this much food in my fridge. It's good that you can make it like this." She smiled and ate the seafood rice he made for her. The cheese on the top layer was really authentic. The bottom layer was made of mashed potatoes and tomato juice. It melted in her mouth and was very delicious. "Try this lemon fish." Guzay picked up a piece for her, dipped it in some juice, and put it in her bowl. Qin Mu took a bite and narrowed her eyes. It was too delicious. She was satisfied with a small bite and looked at the dish greedily. "2 bites is enough. Don't forget your current state," he said in a very euphemistic way. Qin Mu said, "Oh." But she still tasted it again and again until the fish was clean. When the feeling of vomiting came, she covered her mouth and looked at Guzay innocently. Guzay smiled helplessly and helped her up. He quickly and steadily took her to the sink. "You can vomit if you want." Qin Mu was a little proud. She put her hands behind her back and said in a vague voice, "You go to the side." But she couldn't wait for Guzay to leave. She couldn't help but vomit. Wawa threw up his midnight snack and dinner. In the end, he almost offered his bile to the sewers. After vomiting, she felt weak all over and her face was pale. She leaned on Guzay's arm and closed her eyes. "I want to lie down for a while." Guzay looked at her. He was angry and amused at the same time. He also felt a little sorry for her. It was his first time taking care of a pregnant woman. The child was not his, but the woman was his. He reached out to support her and walked towards her bedroom. Not only did he help her lie down, but he also poured her a cup of hot water and helped her drink 2 mouthfuls. Then he said softly, "Rest for a while. I'll make some plain porridge for you." Qin Mu stopped him. "Guzay, there's no need. Even if I eat it, I'll vomit it out. There's no need to trouble yourself." There was a faint smile on her face, and she seemed somewhat restrained. Perhaps it was because he felt guilty. Guzay looked at her. "You mean from now on, we don't have to eat, right?" He leaned forward so that the distance between them was very close. "You want to cultivate? Or a tribulation?" Qin Mu instinctively wanted to block him, but he stopped when he was 10 centimeters away from Qin Mu. She smiled awkwardly. "I don't have an appetite right now. Take a break and eat a little." As he spoke, Guzay straightened his body and said meaningfully, "Children who don't eat will be punished." When he turned around, Qin Mu made a face at him. He happened to turn around and caught her childish behavior. Qin Mu squeezed out a smile. "You saw wrongly. Forget it." He snorted and walked out slowly with an ambiguous smile on his face. Qin Mu leaned against the wall, looked around, and patted her forehead. Then she looked down at her stomach. "Look, you've let a wolf into the house. Chapter 2690. In the kitchen, Guze cooked her porridge and ate some casually. Then, he cleaned up the kitchen. The kitchen was very clean, but there were traces of fire. He knew that these few days, she liked to eat at home. Speaking of which, Qin Mu was a woman who was very attentive to her home and home. He didn't know why Zhou Chongguang was always running outside back then. If it were him, he would stay at home with her every day. However, he didn't know if she would give him such a chance. Originally, he thought that after having this child, she would probably choose him. Most women would be vulnerable at this time and would be dependent. But Qin Mu wasn't like that. Her dependence also seemed a little helpless. Most of their interactions came from his coercion. She had no choice but to do so. She just didn't want to fall out with him. When it came to feelings, he really couldn't see it. Guze smiled helplessly, scooped the porridge, cooled it down, and carried it to the master bedroom. Standing at the door, he was slightly stunned because Qin Mu had fallen asleep. Her head was tilted to one side, her long brown hair covered her small face, and the phone in her hand slipped onto the quilt beside her. Guze walked over gently and placed the porridge at the head of the bed. He sat by the bed and gently lifted her long hair. Looking at her slightly pale face, he felt a little sorry for her. Mama. He murmured her name, his heart burning. He had never thought that one day, he would be able to get so close to her. His heart was indescribably soft, and the face that he loved was right in front of him. Guze leaned over and murmured in a low voice, Moo. He only dared to touch her lightly and left. He looked down at the phone in her hand. Just as he was about to take it away, he found that her phone page was a phone book. And on the page that she was flipping to, there was Zhou Chongguang. No, it was not Zhou Chongguang, but her husband. Guze looked at it for a long time, his eyes a little deep. Finally, his gaze moved to her face again and he smiled faintly. Moo, will there come a day when you will forget him? Did the husband column become me? He was conflicted, but he didn't blame her. This was the difference between Guze and Guze. Guze's love was fulfilling. If her heart was always Zhou Chongguang, if Zhou Chongguang could live well, he was willing to return her to him. And these days, even if he had stolen them, he would not be able to do anything. Guze thought about it and kissed her naughtily. It would be a waste not to kiss her. He might not have such a chance in the future. Qin Mu woke up and realized that he was kissing her. She blushed. You're awake? Guze smiled and said very naturally. Your porridge is ready. Sit up and eat some. Oh, Qin Mu acknowledged. After he sat up, he picked up his phone and tapped a few times. She knew that he had seen it, but he didn't say anything. She wasn't with him. There was no need to explain. Qin Mu felt a little disgusted. Guze looked at her and guessed what she was thinking, so he took the bowl and said, Are you happy to be naughty? Qin Mu smiled and squinted. Yes. She looked at him again and the spoon in his hand. I'll eat it myself. Guze's expression was very serious. Shouldn't you comfort my broken heart? Qin Mu stuttered. Comfort? Comfort what? Guze smiled. You know. Chapter 2691. If you explain it now, does it mean that you have some kind of approval for me? Ha! Guze said casually and then fed her a mouthful of porridge. Qin Mu didn't notice it and ate a mouthful of dog food. She was stunned and looked at Guze. I can eat it myself. I heard that pregnant women don't have much mobility. They're like babies and need to be taken care of, Guze said calmly. Qin Mu stared at him. Who said that? Why haven't I heard of it? Didn't you hear it just now? He smiled. Qin Mu continued to stare at him. He fed her another mouthful of dog food and said slowly, Moo, let me take care of you before the baby is born, okay? His expression was incredibly gentle. No one is more suitable for this role than me. I promise, I won't touch you until you're willing, okay? Qin Mu looked at him in a daze. To be honest, she didn't hate him, but she was always awkward. Let me think about it. In the end, Qin Mu sighed slightly. Also, don't force me or I'll run away. Of course he knew that, but it was already a good result that she was willing to think about it seriously. From that day on, Zhou Chongguang finally moved into this apartment and became a regular. Early in the morning, he would come over to make breakfast for her. Sometimes, he would specially make it, and sometimes he would bring it outside. Qin Mu was very picky. Sometimes, he would drive for an hour to satisfy her appetite. After eating, he would drive her to the gallery and pick her up to get off work in the afternoon. After serving the pregnant woman, it was about 10 o'clock. He didn't have the good fortune to stay in the apartment. That place was Qin Chen's. Even if Qin Mu didn't mind, he would feel that it was inappropriate. However, occasionally on rainy days, Qin Mu would let him stay on the sofa in the living room for one night. On such a night, Gu Zhe would feel particularly warm and happy. It was raining outside at night, but in the apartment, the warm yellow light was shining, very warm and comfortable. He would read on the sofa, and Qin Mu would call him if she needed anything. He was hiding this small happiness, not daring to let her know how ecstatic his heart was. In such days, he forgot the existence of Zhou Chongguang and felt that Qin Mu was his woman. She was soft and gentle and fulfilled all his imaginations. Just like now, he was wrapped in a blanket, leaning against the sofa, making himself a cup of coffee and dealing with work. He had to work overtime at night to take care of her. Qin Mu got up to go to the bathroom and came out to take a look. Then, she smelled the coffee. She stared at the cup of coffee for more than 3 seconds. Gu Zhe smiled. "No. You can't drink it." "But I really want to drink it." Qin Mu smiled, then tightened her thick bathrobe, ran to the French window, and looked out at the rainy night. Gu Zhe sat on the sofa and looked at her gently. After a long time she said softly, "How is Shui Mu now?" Shui Mu had returned to China, and now Gu Zhe's parents were taking care of him. Gu Zhe smiled. "It's pretty good." Qin Mu's fingers gently scratched the glass. Thinking of that child, she couldn't help but think of Zhou Chongguang. She said softly, "Gu Zhe, why don't you take care of Shui Mu yourself?" Chapter 2692. She turned her face away. At that moment, the expression on her face was very rich. There was shock and a touch of helplessness. "Qin Mu, if you don't mind, I can take care of the 3 of you," he said in a hoarse voice. She understood what he meant, turned her head back and looked at the dark night outside. "Gu Zhe, I don't hate Shui Mu at all. I never have." She said softly, "Take care of him. I can take care of myself." As soon as she finished speaking, he hugged her from behind. Gu Zhe hugged her very gently, and his big palm was placed on her lower abdomen, as if he was afraid of hurting her. The baby was more than 2 months old, but her belly was still flat. "Mumu, I'd rather take care of you. Together." His face was on her shoulder, and his voice was hoarse, with a unique seduction of a man. She wanted to break free, but she didn't dare to use force for fear of hurting the baby. "Don't move." His thin lips touched her neck, and his voice was very soft. "Let me hold you for a while." Qin Mu's voice was low. "Let go of me, Gu Zhe. If you do this again, our agreement will be invalid. Isn't it normal for a man to hold his girlfriend?" His voice became hoarse. "I haven't touched you these days. Mumu, you don't see me as a man, do you?" Qin Mu gave a hollow laugh. "Well, I see you as a woman." He stared at her side profile and couldn't do anything to her. Then, he bit her earlobe hard as if he was taking revenge. Qin Mu was in pain, but he bit her earlobe gently. That was the way a man treated a woman, not a girl. She knew that even if he didn't take her, he would go too far, so she began to push him. "Gu Zhe, calm down." We agreed. He gently turned her around and trapped her in his arms. He lowered his head and kissed the tip of her nose. "Let's try, huh?" "I don't want to try with you." Qin Mu turned her face away awkwardly. But he didn't allow her to escape. His voice was bewitching. "Do you not want to try with me, or can't forget him?" She turned around and glared at him. "Gu Zhe, you bastard. I'm a bastard just because I mentioned him?" His voice was gloomy. "Do you think I can stay by your side only if I cook for you like a servant and serve you tea?" She pursed her lips. "No one forced you to do this." His gaze suddenly became passionate. He pinched her chin with his palm, but he didn't dare to use too much force. "Qin Mu, tell me, am I right? Am I just a servant in your heart?" Qin Mu's face turned red with anger. She looked up at him and said, "I don't know if you are a servant or not, but if you continue to be like this, you will be a villain." The muscles on Gu Zhe's face twitched violently. After a while he said in a low voice, "Qin Mu, I'm sorry." Qin Mu turned her face away uncomfortably. "Gu Zhe, go find a woman. You probably have too many hormones." He hadn't expected her to say that. This heartless woman. He had endured it for 8 years, and now all he wanted was a kiss, but she told him to find someone else. Gu Zhe was angry and amused at the same time. The forced feelings just now were gone. At this moment, he just wanted to bite her hard to vent his anger. Chapter 2693. Qin Mu bit her lip. "Gu Zhe, don't be like this." But how could she stop him? So she bit and kissed again and again, and slowly, her tone changed. Gu Zhe's voice was full of temptation. "Mu, let's try. I'll just kiss and not do anything else." Qin Mu sobered up a little and immediately turned her face to the side. "Gu Zhe, I'm pregnant." "You can kiss when you're pregnant." He knew that she was evading, but he knew that if he didn't force her now, he would still be her servant who cooked for her in 8 to 10 years. Qin Mu was gentle, but she would play dumb, and her acting was often very hurtful. Just as Gu Zhe was about to kiss her, the door of the apartment was opened. Qin Chen stood at the door of his apartment and saw a man about to kiss his sister. He knew the man, but Qin Mu was obviously unwilling. Was he trying to force himself on her? Qin Mu put her suitcase aside and put her hands in front of her. She looked like she was watching a good show. "Mr. Gu, you seem to be in a good mood. Does my place look like a crime scene?" Gu Zhe was in a sorry state. It was the most sorry state he had ever been in his life. In terms of sharp-tongued, few people he knew could match up to Qin Chen. His behavior now made him seem like a shady person. Fortunately, Qin Mu had been taken care of by him for so long, so she was too embarrassed to fall out with him. She smiled and said, "It's not that serious." She looked at Gu Zhe. "Qin Chen is back. It's not convenient for you to stay here. The rain is not too heavy outside. Be careful on the road." Gu Zhe's heart, which was a little cold, felt a little warm. He looked at Qin Mu and knew what she meant by her words. "You're not just my servant." Qin Mu smiled slightly. "You're someone I have to consider seriously, but don't force me too much. I can't accept what happened today." Gu Zhe just ruffled her long hair. "I scared you." "Not really. I just don't like it," Qin Mu said in a low voice. Then she took his coat and gave it to him. "Put on your clothes. I'll walk you to the door." Gu Zhe's gaze grew gentler and gentler. Qin Chen, on the other hand, was shocked. Was there really a relationship between his little sister and Gu Zhe? Looking at the wolf in love and the girl in love, he wasn't forced? If he hadn't come back just now, would they have that? However, Qin Chen was a very open-minded person and would not meddle in other people's business. He just watched as Gu Zhe and Qin Mu went out together, and he went straight to the bathroom to take a shower. In front of the elevator, Qin Mu and Gu Zhe stood side by side. Gu Zhe ran his fingers through his hair. "Sorry. No need." Qin Mu hugged her body and looked at the number on the elevator. She said again, "Drive slowly back." He lowered his head and looked at her little face. "Do you care about me?" "The child's father," Qin Mu said with a smile. She poked his heart with her little hand and said, "Do it again." "No, there won't be a next time." Gu Zhe grabbed her little hand and said in a hoarse voice, "What is this? Are you comforting me?" "Well, I guess so." She admitted it. Then she stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the lips. Only a second later, she left. "Will this make you a little more confident?" "Every day?" he asked greedily. Qin Mu smiled. "It depends on my mood." Then she restrained her expression and said in a low voice, "Gu Zhe, I'm not cold-hearted, but I need time. I'll probably make a decision when the child is born." "Okay." He looked at her and lowered his voice. "I'll wait. And I'm sorry about today." Chapter 2694. Qin Mu smiled and didn't say anything. The elevator happened to arrive at this moment. Gu Zhe didn't go in immediately. Instead, he looked at Qin Mu and said, "I'm leaving." Qin Mu said good night. She was there so softly that he couldn't bear to leave for a moment. Finally, he went forward and hugged her gently. Qin Mu didn't avoid him. Gu Zhe murmured, "I'll pick you up and bring you to my place tomorrow." It was really too inconvenient here. After Qin Chen came back, Qin Mu didn't refuse. She just smiled and said, "Qin Chen just came back. I want to talk to him more." Gu Zhe was a little sad, but he still did as she said. Qin Mu watched him enter the elevator and then walked back. Qin Chen had already taken a shower and changed into a set of clothes. He poured himself a glass of red wine and held it as he watched Qin Mu walk in. "You changed to a new man?" Qin Chen's eyes were smiling. Qin Mu glanced at him and asked, "What do you mean by changed?" She lowered her head and looked at her lower abdomen. She said softly, "I'm pregnant. The father of the child is Gu Zhe." Qin Chen took a sip of the wine elegantly and smiled meaningfully. "I didn't know that you were so obedient. The child is Gu Zhe's? Then you two are really compatible." Qin Mu glared at him, but she couldn't stop him from talking. "Have you thought about it?" Qin Chen smiled faintly. "I can guarantee that Gu Zhe will never cheat. Even if you want to divorce him, you can't find a reason." Qin Mu frowned. "Qin Chen, what are you trying to say?" Qin Chen smiled in an extremely unrestrained manner. "I mean, what if one day you want to be with Zhou Chongguang again? Gu Zhe is like a sticky candy that you can't get rid of. What should you do then?" Qin Mu looked at him. "That's impossible." She sat on the sofa and wrapped herself in a blanket. "Qin Chen, it's all in the past. Now that I'm pregnant, it's even more impossible." Perhaps the appearance of this child signified their impossibility. Qin Mu was in a daze as she stared blankly ahead. Qin Chen went to the kitchen to make a glass of milk for her and placed it in front of her. He picked up the wine glass and smiled as he said, "Anything is possible. Have you ever thought that you would be with Gu Zhe before?" Qin Mu frowned again. "I haven't been with him yet." "You already have a child, and you're saying that you haven't been together?" Qin Chen smiled. "Don't say that you haven't known each other deeply." The words "know each other deeply" still made Qin Mu blush slightly. "I don't remember." She sighed softly and told him about Gu Mei. Qin Chen's expression was rarely exaggerated. He held the wine glass, looked at Qin Mu and smiled. "You didn't even feel it. How can you be sure that this child is Gu Zhe's? And not Tom, Dick, or Harry's?" Qin Mu brushed her hair uncomfortably. "When I woke up, I was hugging Gu Zhe, she said with great difficulty. "We weren't wearing clothes." Qin Chen couldn't stop laughing. "Did you feel it? You didn't know when we were having sex, did you?" Qin Mu swallowed hard. "Should I rely on Gu Zhe now? He said that the child was his. It was better than saying that it was an unknown stranger." Qin Chen smiled faintly. "It doesn't matter who the child is. What matters is who you like." Chapter 2695. Sure enough, Qin Mu was a little stunned. Then she looked at Qin Chen and said, It's better if you don't come back." Qin Chen smiled and said, "Sorry, I have half a year's vacation." "Is it so easy to take leave in the United States?" Qin Mu clenched her fists angrily. Qin Chen's smile deepened. "Because the laboratory is my own. I can take as long as I want." Qin Mu couldn't talk to him anymore. The gallery was also hers. Why did she have to work like a slave even when she was pregnant? Qin Chen probably saw through her thoughts and smiled. "When you can learn to be as shameless and coquettish as Cher, you can be free," he said coldly. "Isn't Gu Zhe pursuing you? Why don't you use such a good resource?" Qin Mu lowered her head and said very softly, "Qin Chen, I actually seriously consider him." "It's good that you are serious." Qin Chen smiled. "I'm just afraid that you won't be serious." As he said that, he got up and said, "It's getting late. Go to bed early. I'll send you to the gallery tomorrow." Qin Mu grunted in acknowledgement. Qin Chen's return indeed made her heave a sigh of relief. She was seriously considering Gu Zhe, but if the two of them were together for too long, she was afraid that her choice would be a compromise and become a kind of favor. That night, Qin Mu didn't sleep well. She kept thinking about what Qin Chen said. "You did it with Gu Zhe. Do you feel anything? Are you sure that the father of the child is Gu Zhe?" In fact, she was very sure at first, But now that Qin Chen said that, she wasn't so sure. Perhaps at 4 months, she should do an amniocentesis to confirm the DNA. Although Qin Chen said that it didn't matter who the child belonged to, Qin Mu wasn't a person who wanted to live a muddle-headed life for the rest of her life. If the child belonged to Gu Zhe, it would be the same as now. If it wasn't, she wouldn't consider Gu Zhe. The reason was that he had lied. She didn't sleep well that night. In the morning, she got up with dark circles under her eyes to brush her teeth and wash her face. When she changed her clothes and walked out, Qin Chen had already prepared breakfast. Qin Chen's taste was extremely exquisite. Even his breakfast was like a work of art. Qin Mu ate the toast and suspected that it was cut by Qin Chen's scalpel. However, she ate and didn't say anything. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to find such an expensive nanny. Qin Chen had the habit of drinking coffee early in the morning. He held the mug in his beautiful hand and sipped the coffee. Beside him was a financial newspaper. Then he laughed. "Glory, has it been taken over by Zhao Zi? Big and small, it's always him. Has Zhou Chongguang become a monk?" Qin Mu almost spat out the milk in her mouth. She looked at Qin Chen with a trace of resentment in her eyes. Then, she picked up the newspaper and looked at it. She read the words on the square clearly, and then she was a little stunned. It seemed that she hadn't heard from Zhou Chongguang for a long time. Could it be that something happened to him? Qin Chen waved 2 fingers in front of her and said with a smile, "Last night, someone said that she was seriously considering Gu Zhe. Now, she's worried about her ex-husband, huh?" Qin Mu pursed her lips. Qin Chen. I'm a little worried. When he left that day, he didn't look good. He gave up Shui Mu and her. Did he give up Glory too? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.